All right, you've been working on your funk chops, and maybe you're at a place where you can play these types of solos. That is a great foundation that we as improvisers never want to lose sight of. But what if we add a little bit of this into the mix? Today, we're talking about how we can enhance our funk solos with just a little bit of bebop. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this concept, I first want to have just one caveat. This does not in any way mean that bebop is better than playing these funky, rhythmic, minor pentatonic ideas. And I would actually say, if you cannot play any bebop and you only have a lot of really great minor pentatonic, blues, rhythmic ideas, you can sound killing on funk tunes. But if you have none of that stuff together and you only try to play changes or play bebop ideas on these sort of tunes, it's always going to be sort of lacking something. So make sure that you don't lose sight of these foundational items that we really need to have to play this style, and I would actually argue the entire style of Black American music. This is just part of that language. Funk and bebop are just two sort of different vernaculars, but we're really wanting to learn how to speak the entirety of this language. All right, so the starting point, as I said, minor pentatonic, rhythm, all that sort of stuff on these types of tunes. We've talked about this a lot on this channel. You can go back and check out any of the things where we talk about the blues, talk about minor pentatonics, talk about that type of playing. But just to give a little bit of examples, let's just check out a couple ideas of what I really think of when I think of the idiomatic types of ideas that work on these types of tunes. Once we have some facility and fluency in those types of ideas, we can start to think about other directions that can just give us different avenues to go on these sort of tunes. A lot of these tunes have long stretches of the same chord. The tune we're going to look at today is actually The Chicken. It is kind of like a modified blues, so it does have some more moving harmony, but many times it'll just be like a dominant chord for that whole time. So you got to find some other ways to create ideas. The first thing we want to get in touch with to sort of give us some bebop and change playing approaches to this is just think about, well, what actually are the chord tones? When we're playing minor pentatonic ideas, we're not really so much thinking about these vertical chord structures. A lot of times we might be thinking horizontal, thinking melodic. And so we got to really get in touch with what is the chord that's going on. So our first chord in this tune, The Chicken, is a B flat dominant seventh chord. So we really want to make sure that we can spell and are really in touch with the chord tones, just the basic arpeggio. I would add, it's really important to make sure you know that in all the different octaves, obviously all the chords for a given song would be important for this approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those chord tones and we are going to slide out of our minor pentatonic ideas into resolving to some of the chord tones. I can tell you this is particularly potent on the major third. Just last week of when I released this video, I released a short talking about this. I do a short a YouTube short, I should say, every other week when I don't release a long form video. If you're really interested in my sort of distilled approach to improvisation or just like the licks that I like to play, I would really make sure to check those out because that's really what those usually are. But either way, we really want to think about landing on these chord tones, like I said, particularly the major third. Let's just see how that would transform some of these minor pentatonic licks into things that resolve to these chord tones. Each one of those ideas really exemplifies this approach. If you look at the first one, it's literally just straight down the minor pentatonic scale, starting on the fifth. And then when I get to that D flat, rather than going all the way down to the low B flat, I resolve up a half step to the D natural. I'm right back in the chord, and then I like to, jump up to the high root. That just sounds nice to me. But this going from being a little outside of the chord when we're playing minor pentatonic, sliding back into the chord, it's just really satisfying for us as the listener. And each one of these has a little different twist on it. The second one, again, straight up minor pentatonic for the first half, really simple lick, and then there's a little enclosure around that major third. Enclosures are really useful for this kind of approach where you're sliding in and out of minor pentatonic, then just straight down the arpeggio, moving through the 5 to the 4 to the major third there at the end. And then the last one, I sort of extend this concept. Again, minor pentatonic, straight up, sort of funky blues kind of lick. But then instead of just thinking about chord tones, or excuse me, just thinking about major thirds or the triad, I think about all the chord tones that are there and imply sort of more like a mixolydian sound at the back half of that lick. It's all about being able to drift from the pentatonic stuff into a more chord or harmonic based way of thinking. Let's see what happened if I threw this into the actual tune. Now I should add, this also works really, really well on the 4 chord of any blues, but definitely here. And so I would actually still keep thinking about B flat minor pentatonic on those 4 chords, and then just try to resolve to some of the chord tones that are in the 4 chord, the G natural, the E flat, so on and so forth. But my basic ideas are still B flat minor pentatonic. Cool. That is our first step towards getting a little more change playing in our sort of funk chops. Now, the next thing that we can do is we can start to superimpose some 2/5s in key places. As many of us probably know, 2/5s are part of the language of bebop for sure, but really kind of the entirety of jazz in many ways. It's just a kind of foundational, functional harmony building block. And getting in touch with the typical ideas that work on 2/5s is really important, but here we can apply some of that information in possibly interesting ways. So a couple ways you can do it. Let's talk about the first and most obvious one. As I mentioned, this tune is sort of a modified blues, meaning that we've got 4 bars of the 1 chord, and then in the 5th measure, we go to the 4 chord. So in any type of blues, whether it's a funky tune like this, whether it's swinging, it's very, very typical to think about a 2-5-1 leading us to the 4 chord. So in this case, we got to think the 4 chord is an E flat chord, and then what is the 2-5-1 that gets us there? It's F minor 7 to B flat dominant 7. So the measure preceding that, measure 4, I would think about that as a 2-5-1. You could think about it both measure 3 and measure 4 as a long 2-5-1, but since this tempo is a little slower, to me it feels more natural to do it on the 4th bar. You're already going to be probably playing kind of like double time ideas. So let's see what that would sound like if I generally just stick to, again, playing sort of like my typical kind of funk bag of stuff, but get a 2-5-1 in there. It's really going to immediately be like, bam, I am playing changes, I am playing bebop. As I said, that approach works on any blues. Very, very good way to work those 2-5-1 ideas into your solos. But we could actually extend that, and we could apply this concept to any dominant chord. If we look at the latter half of this tune, there is a 4-bar phrase where the first 3 measures are all C7, and then there's a little unison like in the last bar. So on these C7 measures, we can turn those into 2-5-1s to help us access some of that sound. Now, this 2-5-1 actually never resolves where it's going. If we think about a dominant chord, it is functioning as 5 in a 2-5-1. So we've got to think about C as the 5th note of what scale. So if we think about that, it is going to be F. F, G, A, B flat, C. So C is the 5 of F. So that's our kind of target key that we actually never get to. Now, from there, we've got to think about what's my 2 in F. It would be G. So that means over this kind of long section of C7, we could be thinking some of this is G minor 7 to C7. That can allow us to get in touch with some of those ideas. Now you could literally think every single bar is G minor 7 to C7. That's maybe not how I would approach it. I might do it as like the first bar, and then I kind of drift back into C, and then maybe the 3rd bar, or maybe I kind of think it's starting in C. The 2nd measure is that 2-5-1, G to C, and then back to just to C, just so I get some sort of like semi-resolution points, at least in the way that I'm building phrases. But the way the actual lines resolve might be a little different than when you actually practice the 2-5-1. So keep that in mind. Let's hear what this would sound like. Cool. These 2 approaches are very, very useful. Not just on this tune, actually not just on funk tunes. On many tunes, they are going to help you to access a little bit more of like a change-oriented approach. Now, when we're just playing arpeggios or landing on chord tones, are we necessarily playing changes? No, but we're thinking harmonically, and that is the key, that we're really connected with the chord changes that are going on. There are lots of other ways you can extend this, thinking a little bit more about the modes. you know, maybe thinking about some of the other scalar directions you can go and kind of extend the harmony. But if you can do these two things pretty well, you will sound pretty happening on this tune, especially when you combine it with that foundation of great minor pentatonic ideas, great rhythm, and a great sense of sound and feel. That's where it's really at when you're playing these funk tunes. This other stuff is just going to sort of enhance and give you different avenues to go in your solo. Cool. We'll see you in the woodshed.